Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm your host, Adam, with my co-host, Mick Mulroy here. I am coming from snowy Canada. We've had a half meter of snow, plus some extra centimeters of it this week. So definitely been buried here in Ontario. And Mick, I see you have some snowshoes behind you, which make me feel like you're showing a slight Canadian side.
Yes. Well, we're in Montana, so there's a lot of connections and similarities between people from Montana and Canada. But we actually don't have snow, which is a big problem because my company we do tactical training for the military, especially in the winter. But we're here for a month in Bozeman. People are familiar with Bozeman. And it's going to be 50 degrees today. So not exactly what you want to hear when you're doing winter warfare training. But we're going to have to go higher and higher up the altitude to find the good snow, and we'll make it work. But yes, you have snow. We do not.
Yeah, it's a bit weird here because right now it's minus 17 Celsius here in the city, which is not normal for us. Actually, we're pretty mild usually because we're on the lake, so it's been a deep freeze. But yeah, so sometimes it feels odd because you're in the mountains and you're seeing that, and we're in a lowland around the lake where we're normally in much milder conditions, and it's now flipped. And I think that actually is probably a good segue into our topic today. Actually, what I wanted to talk about today.
So we're at 11 degrees Celsius because I know we got the Canadian American thing going on.
11.
Yeah.
11.
Wow,
that's high. That's high for this time of year. But I wanted to lead into what we were talking about today, and I think that's a good segue about how everything feels like it's kind of flipped around on its head. You and I have done a lot of, in the last few weeks, I would say, current events podcasts. In fact, a lot of the time it's stuff that's happening kind of like the previous day or live while we're talking about it. And the thing that I hear the most from people right now is something around the lines of like, everything seems to be on fire. Like it's just every day there's something new. In fact, when we were talking about setting up this episode, we sort of said, we'll do this topic unless something else happens, right? We'll do this topic unless we have another current events podcast to do. And I think it's important, though, for us, to take the applied part of Stoicism, as we talk about this podcast title, and talk about what we can do in these times, right? Because so many people, I feel like they're feeling anxiety or depression about what's going on. And Donald Robertson said in one of his articles recently that he sort of characterizes depression or anxiety as when people aren't living according to their values or how they feel they're supposed to be living. And I feel like Stoicism can kind of help with that. That's one of the things that I take away when I think about those. So do you have any openers you want to start with on this one, Mick, or should we go off my list?
To me, yes. So to me, part of how you deal with this is one of the most simple concepts in Stoicism, but it's also, in many cases, the hardest one to get people to actually grasp. Like anybody can say, I'm only going to focus what's under my control, right? And not worry about the things that aren't, whether it's the weather or whether it's, world events that you have no control over. But it's super hard. It's super easy to get the concept, what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control.
That's right.
But it's not as easy as when you really talk to people who they tend to go on and on about issues, including myself. I don't take myself out of the category that you really don't have any influence over. And it is just, I think it just causes major anxiety for two reasons: because of the event itself, right? The world's on fire. I know that's a general thing, but whatever makes you think the world's on fire happens. So I understand the issue, but the anxiety comes even further from the fact you can't do anything about it. So And
Right.
sometimes you can. So I'm not saying like disconnect from
Yeah.
society. Don't try to make a difference. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. If you can make a difference, make a difference. But
Yeah.
we had actually a perfect opening line, right? Um, we're doing winter warfare training in Montana. It's 51 degrees today. Like
Right.
I could dwell on it, whine about it, cry about it, or we could try to find a way to get to
Right.
higher altitude, find snow and discover,
Absolutely.
right? So,
Absolutely.
and I think if people really embrace that dichotomy of control that Epictetus has, and I have one of his quotes: "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." I mean, how simple is that, right? That's why I say
Yeah.
it's straightforward. But if you can do that, and there's more to it when it
Yeah.
comes to Stoicism and dealing with trying times, but that one concept that you can just say, you know what, um, I'm not going to harp on something that happened in the past because that's also something you can't change. Like somebody was rude to you, um, you know, not cool,
Yeah.
move on. But there's all sorts of examples in life where you would benefit from embracing this concept.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note, and that's what we're going to talk about today. It's important to note that the dichotomy of control is not a walk away philosophy, right? You are not, we are not as Stoics known for just saying, well, not my problem and walking away. But what we do
Right.
do is we understand what we can and can't do, right? And when you look at the way control works, there are really two ways that control works within the Stoicism world. There's the dichotomy of control from Epictetus, and then Hierocles had something called the concentric circles, right, which talked about a series of circles that get bigger and bigger as you go out. And it starts with mind and self and goes into like body, parents, grandparents, other family, and it goes out to the tribe or your fellow citizens and all of that stuff. And it's easy to look at something like that and for someone to think, well, this is just like some mental exercise that some philosopher is going to do on a couch somewhere. But in reality, I think this is really important, right? No political movement is, for example, started. It's no political movement is started with 100,000 people joining together in a place and having a rally. Everything always starts from some acorn or some seed that starts somewhere with one person getting something in their mind. And I think that's something to take away from this when it comes to the circles. Like, I don't control what happens in terms of international geopolitics, but what I do control is, in my mind, I know that I view violence as not a good thing, but sometimes a necessary thing. And so, for me though, my priority is to make sure that things are settled amicably, and so I can control that, and in my mind and self I can make that decision. For my body, I know that I'm not going to go out there and, if I have a disagreement with someone, physically intimidate them. And with my family, my friends, my partner, whatever it is, I'm going to make a decision in that circumstance to say, you know what, I'm going to try and be better and handle those things better today. Because sometimes when I talk to people today, they say it feels like everything goes off really quickly, like
Mm-hmm.
it's like a British term, but like it just goes from 0 to 100 like that, right? And in reality, if it many times over, it just takes one person to be like, hold up, let's let's not do that, right? And I think it does sort of carry forward, and it does sort of do things like, because what Hierocles is not saying, right, is that you don't have control over anything outside of the sphere that is your mind and self.
Right.
Or sorry, he's not saying you have no influence over those things. He's just saying the only thing you control is you. And then as you get
Mm-hmm.
further and farther and farther away, excuse me, you get to a point where you don't really, there's not really a lot you can do about those things, but it starts somewhere. And I think that's a really important thing today. Now, uh, you know, at the same time, the dichotomy of control also means like you shouldn't worry about stuff that you can't control. I don't know what's going to happen in the world in terms of, I don't know, military things or environmental things or whatever. So I can't really worry about
Yep.
those, but I can certainly think about what I can do now, is what I think we would
And
take from.
that's sure. And that's where I think Seneca's famous quote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality," right, really comes to play. So there's anxiety about things that you just can't control, right? Like the weather.
Yeah,
Um, there's also anxiety about things that could happen in the future,
sure.
right? And I mean, the new generation, I think, really does focus on self care, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way.
Right.
But certainly my generation didn't talk about their level of anxiety as much as, say, my kids' generation. Not them necessarily, but part of that, when I talk to younger people, and I have, kids and godkids, and so I talk to a lot of younger people,
Yeah.
most of the anxiety that I hear about adults is about world events. Most of the anxiety I hear from kids or younger people, including adults, is about things that are going to happen or could happen to them in the future. You see what I mean? And there's a difference there, right? There's a difference in the sense that it's worrying, to put a basic term on it. You're worrying about things.
Yeah.
If that helps you prepare, right? You're worried about a test, so you study harder. That's a
Yeah.
positive thing. Like you just said, that's totally within your control, whether you study
Absolutely.
harder.
Yeah.
So there is a reason to have the foreknowledge of an event and try to be better prepared for it. It's not
Yeah.
anxiety, right? Anxiety over something that could happen in the future that you either don't have the ability to change or you're not changing. That is
Right.
not helpful.
Yeah.
And that is where I think people need to do a self-assessment, figure out what is it's within their control, what is not within their control, and really just focus on the stuff that is in your control, and to leave the other stuff to,
Yeah.
whether if you're religious, leave it to God. If you're not, leave it to, I don't know, Mother
Fortuna.
Nature. Yeah.
That's what the Stoics would say,
Fortuna.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And but I think it's really important because there's a positive source of action here that people kind of forget when they look at the control either within the circles or the dichotomy, and they say they basically say there's things I control and there's things I don't control, and then they sort of go, well, then I just am supposed to think about that, and it's like, well, no, as a philosophy of action, which we know Stoicism is, the things you control are supposed to help you align with what your next choice should be, right? And it is a philosophy of action. It is a philosophy of choice, and that's where if we were to take some things like if you don't like what's going on within your city, province, country, state, whatever you want to call it, right? There are things you can do. There are things I don't control the outcome of an election, but I do control what I do during an election cycle. Do I join in a protest? Do I sign up for my local riding for a party that I align with? Do I go to the leader debates and ask questions, right? Those are actions that you can take because you do control those things. I have so much of this feels so hands off. And I think, we've talked before, we have episodes about Stoicism being mischaracterized, but so many times over, right? It's like, well, basically Stoics go, well, I don't control that. So I'm leaving or I'm walking away from it. And it's like, well, no, that's not true. You're actually searching for what you can do.
Yep.
And that's an interesting point. Like I remember Massimo Pigliucci in one of his podcast episodes, he said something like, someone was asking about like, well, I don't control that I have a fever and what do I do or whatever. And he said, well, a Stoic would take the Advil, right?
Yeah.
They would take the Tylenol, right? Because they can control that and then they can hopefully get better and whatnot. And of course with,
Right.
fevers can always give you something worse. People don't remember that. But, that's the thing is it's a choice towards action. So
Yeah, and on that point, I would, and some of this is a bit self-serving in the sense that if we're talking to people who are inclined to Stoicism, I want them to be engaged in the in the discussions that matter to society. So
absolutely.
I would push, anybody that's listening to us, that it's your obligation. You might not have complete control. Nobody really has complete control, right?
No.
But if you could have influence, a positive influence,
Yeah.
you kind of have an obligation because, we could be heard the wrong way saying, well, you're not going to change international geopolitics or just ignore it. No, if good people ignore what's going on in the world ever, not just during these trying times, then the only people left are going to be people that are manipulative, corrupt, and out for their own purposes. So I do think Stoics have an obligation to be engaged and try to influence, because it does impact you and your family and your friends and your future, right? And your future of your, everybody else. So I would make a distinguishing comment that not having complete control is not an excuse for inaction and,
Right.
sitting on the
Totally
sidelines.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's a really important step to take here with this, right? Which is that we have so much freedom of choice for ourselves more than anything. And I think that when we disregard that, I think we're doing ourselves and our lives a disservice. Now let's pivot quickly here because I know we're on limited time to talk about. I want to talk about two exercises that I think are very important in times like this. And the first one is called the view from above. Now, we're not going to do the exercise here. We don't have enough time. But a recommendation I make for a lot of people when they think about some of these things, right? And yes, this is a privilege that you and I have, for example, because we are in a place that is relatively peaceful, relatively stable, etc. But at the same time, the view from above is one of those things where if you're dealing with any kind of challenge, right? The goal is to kind of take a step back and start imagining a view from above you, higher and higher and higher, to remember that at some point we are a mote of dust on a speck on a pebble
Mhm.
in an infinite universe of so much stuff. Like we're not even like if we were on a ruler, like or if we were on some kind of time scale or something, like we don't even register. We're so small. And I don't think it's nihilistic. I think the important thing to take from that is these things are somewhat well, they're first off is they're transitive. They kind of they will always happen and they come and go and they're cyclic and they have those things. But also, you know, in this singular moment, right? It's
Mhm.
not it's not really the whole world a lot of the time. Now there are people today who are probably in far worse situations than you and that's a really challenging view for them. And I totally don't want to disregard that. But it is one of those things where you do have to say, today as we're recording this, what's going on, right? Is it as bad as we think it is? When you take the step away, sometimes that can give you that view to say, like, okay, my boss yelled at me on Friday, but how bad is this in the whole thing? Well, I didn't do that report well, but I've done a lot of the other reports well, and it's really a tiny thing, and it's probably going to go away. And that's something that I think works for a lot of people in terms of a practice that we have that's within the world of Stoicism today. But what's your view on that? I mean, pun intended, I guess.
Well, I mean, as you were talking about that, one thing that it reminded me of, so my dad's really liked the poem. I guess it was a poem, but Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot. You familiar with,
Yeah,
yeah, the whole
absolutely.
poem and then the picture, of course. I don't remember which probe it was. You might, where it turned around and took a picture right uh,
It was
as it
Voyager.
was
Yeah.
leaving. I think, yeah, Voyager, right, and it was that stream or beam of some kind of light and that little dot right in the
Yeah, it's
center,
a
which
shot
was
through the
us.
rings of
Yeah,
Saturn. Yeah, shot or
there you
the rings
go.
of Neptune, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured you fill in the blanks for my
Well,
yeah, yeah. I always loved it. I mean, I probably should get that picture because it really does put things in perspective. That
Yeah.
um, in good and bad, it's like in a way it shows that we are somewhat unique. At least we think we
Mhm.
are. But more
Yeah.
importantly, I think it puts in perspective that you know we as a whole are not that significant on a universal scale, right?
Right.
So then
Right.
any little issues that we might have as individuals, I mean, yeah, if you extrapolate that down, you shouldn't think everything's the end of the world, is what I'm saying about.
Yeah.
Life goes
Yeah.
on, and and so will you. And then if you don't, then that's just part of the existence of anything. Um, so I do think that's important to keep in mind because a lot of I think anxiety of things is become sometimes because we overemphasize um, ourselves, to be frank. Like everybody doesn't
Yeah.
want, like you do something stupid, right? You could
Yeah.
obsess about it for a long time, but it's actually good to know that most other people have forgotten it, don't care, right? Like they
Yeah.
use, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a humbling in a way, but like, oh, I said something stupid. I'm so embarrassed, and
Yeah.
everybody's talking about
You
me, and
know.
you almost want to say, actually, they're not talking about you because they don't care that much. You know what I mean?
No.
So it's in a way, it's kind of like put yourself in the right position. The other thing that I think is extraordinarily helpful, and we talked about this a bit in the sports episode we had. I'm sure we'll have many more. Is Masonius's Musonius Rufus's concept that you kind of prepare for hard times.
Yeah.
Right. In good times, you don't necessarily, and yes, sometimes that could be just physical endurance and your ability to take cold and heat and, go without food, etc., in a healthy way. But it also does kind of toughen you up, right? So much of like the training, for example, that we're going to do here is about pushing yourself because you need to do it in times of, at least in the military concept, peace, so you can be prepared for it in war, right? So if something happens, which, God forbid it doesn't, but you ever have to go and actually implement what you learn, you got to know what it's like. You can't sugarcoat it in peace and then expect to be tough enough to endure it in war, right? So that's a very specific example, but I think Rufus was talking about it in general. Like he wasn't just talking to soldiers, he was talking to people in general, that if you kind of prepare yourself for a hardship, even if it's mental or emotional, you can be better prepared for it. And I think preparation is the best way to deal with anxiety. I really do. I think you end up better off for it because you're just ready. You're more ready than you would be. And I think in a way that kind of concept of mental, physical, and emotional preparation is a key part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut, he had an interesting statement, which I kind of ended up paraphrasing, and it's actually taped to one of my computer monitors in my office here in the back of my apartment, which is the best weapon against fear is competence. And we're going to talk about this during the space program episode, but the one thing you do before you ever set foot in a spacecraft, for example, is you do things like failure modes analysis and hazard analysis, like what could go wrong and what happens if it goes wrong. And you don't say what might happen. You literally say, what will happen if this fails? And then you have competence in knowing, do we have a redundancy? Do we have a control in place? Do we have a safety feature in place or a mitigation that keeps this from causing really bad things from happening? You actually expect that bad things will happen on a mission. And then by doing that, you actually have really good missions. In fact, I'll use a quick example, which is in Apollo 13, they already had a plan drawn up for using the lunar lander as a lifeboat if the command module failed. And they had to dust off that binder because it had been developed like years before. But they did have a plan for that, and they implemented that plan, and those 3 men came back, right? And I think it's the same kind of thing here, right? You have to be prepared for what can come ahead. So we can talk about other things like the premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, or something like that too. But at the same time,
that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I didn't include that in my list because what someone told me, they were like, yeah, but this is already happening. And I was like, okay, well, you're right. Meaning world events are already happening. But I think that's a big thing to take away here is this idea that, like, if you can do those things, it can help with that fear, is understand. And again, it goes back to that control. I control that there's enough gas in my car so that if I have a split second call into work, I can drive away. I don't. That means I got to make sure it's always gassed. That's what I control. I don't know when they're going to call me.
It's contingency planning, right? That's a big, what you're talking about, with the having a backup for the escape pod, for example. That's contingency planning, right? You can do that in your own life too. And you just said it, like, why let the gas go below a half tank? I'm a dad, so these kind of things I say constantly.
Yeah.
I'm sure to the annoyance of people I talk to, kids, for example, but there's a reason. There's a reason why dads say that is because they probably have done it the other way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, I've definitely done that.
Right. Doesn't necessarily mean we're smarter. It just means we're older. And we might have at one time realized, oh crap, I should have filled up my gas tank, and now I'm in the middle of Nevada and I can't, the next guy, you get my point. You get where I'm going.
From a gas station. Yeah.
So contingency planning should be everyone's, not just the Canadian Space Agency and NASA. It should be everybody, right? Because you'll be more in line. Speaking of, and we'll keep going here, but speaking of things that might cause anxiety, so I'm going to change over on, because I'm about to go on TV and talk about the U.S. potentially attacking Iran, which I just got requested to do.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
obviously is beyond a lot of our control, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that we could have an influence on
Yes.
as citizens of the countries that are potentially involved or not involved.
Yes.
And this, I understand that any kind of potential for a regional conflict, which also has a potential to extend to
More
a
global
broader
circumstance.
conflict. Yeah, totally. The other
Yeah.
issues that I would advocate for Stoics, especially to do, is not just consider everything else that's not immediately impacting you as something that you shouldn't be concerned about.
Yeah.
The whole global citizen concept of the cosmopolis
Yes.
part of Stoicism isn't just a kumbaya concept. I
Yeah.
think it means that you're supposed to be engaged in the world events. You see what I
Yes.
mean? It isn't
I
that
agree.
we're all supposed to. It is actually a call to do something, not just to embrace this, kind of ephemeral concept that we're all brothers and sisters. Not that we're not, but it's more than that.
No, but
To be a global citizen,
absolutely.
you have to actually care about what's going on.
You do.
That
And I
makes
think,
sense.
when you look at the concentric circles, right? The thing is the concentric circles go all the way out until you hit the universe, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have really any impact on the universe, but to believe that we are not interconnected would be irrational based on the evidence that we have today. So the last thing, I don't want to forget the last one that I would say that I use in these tough times that we have is an exercise called the river. So imagining yourself standing next to a river. And I used to think they were bubbles, but now I think of them as leaves from a tree. I'm in Canada, and we have a lot of trees. And the idea is that when a really bad event happens, imagine it like a leaf falling off of a tree, and it hits the river, and it's right in front of you, and it's passing in front of you, and when it's really impacting you is when it's right in front of you, and you can see the detail of the leaf, and you can see everything that's going on. But then as time passes, it progresses, and it carries off eventually off into the distance until you can't see it anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that these current times where things are happening are irrelevant, because it'll just pass and it'll be fine. That's not what someone is saying. But what I would say is, human beings have been around a little while, not a long time, but a little while. And things that happen today are echoes of what's happened in the past before. Current events happening in parts of the world now, could clearly be mirrored from what's happened in Rome or Greece or Egypt or Mesopotamia. And I think, that's an important thing. And so all the river really tells us when you do that exercise is to say, you know what, we should take a step back and make sure that we understand that these things are passing. And once they are behind us, right, we cannot change those things. We can learn from them. We can discuss them. We can take lessons from them into the future, but we cannot change those anymore as well. And that's the key thing for me as well. So if you see something happening today, right, something violent, something you don't like, something that doesn't align with the virtues, you cannot change that thing from 5 seconds ago. What you can do is change the future and take an action there. And I hope that steals more people into understanding, like stealing their resolve to say, we can do this, right? And, I don't have to be so worried about the big things. I can worry about what's in front of me. So do you have any closing thoughts for us today, Mick, on this one?
I thought that was a perfect way to close it, quite frankly.
Oh, I don't usually get that one. So there we go. I think we'll close, but though by saying, and we'd really love to hear from people on the podcast. We do want to create a community here. So info@pubandporch.com. Leave a comment on the video on YouTube. Leave us whatever you got. We'd love to hear from you. These trying times don't seem to be closing anytime soon, but we can definitely, set ourselves up for success to be able to take these times in a much better mindset as we go forward. So we'll close with my usual. Take care of everybody. Cheers, Mick.
Sláinte.
Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism, send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.